The Georgia rain poured down on Fort Benning like a relentless flood, turning the training grounds into a muddy sea that swallowed boots and soaked uniforms. By 0600 hours, the skies had already unleashed enough water to make even the most seasoned drill sergeants contemplate indoor alternatives. Smart recruits prayed for classroom instruction on days like these, huddled under whatever shelter they could find, waiting for the weather to break. Madison Chen wasn't most recruits. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She stood at the edge of the firing range with the kind of focused stillness that made her nearly invisible despite being in plain sight. No special insignia marked her as exceptional. No prior accolades announced her potential. Just standard issue fatigues that hung slightly loose on her frame, regulation boots caked with Georgia clay, and eyes that missed nothing. Everything about her seemed unremarkable, ordinary even, except for the way she observed. There was something deliberate about her attention, methodical and precise, like someone who'd learned that missed details could be the difference between success and failure. The range master barely acknowledged her presence, just another face in a long line of recruits who thought they knew which end of a rifle was which. Madison nodded once and took her position, her movements economical, her preparation meticulous. She'd been awake since 0400, sitting on the edge of her bunk in barracks that smelled of industrial cleaner and nervous sweat. The kind of place where personal space was a distant memory and privacy existed only in the moments before dawn when most were still clinging to precious sleep. Her footlocker sat open beneath her bunk, contents arranged with the discipline of someone who found order comforting. Standard issue gear in precise rows, personal items minimal, and at the bottom, wrapped in a simple cloth, a bronze medal she hadn't looked at in over 2 years. She'd taken it out that morning, held it in her palm while her bunkmates slept, and made herself remember. A shooting competition back home in rural Minnesota. 3 figures standing on a makeshift podium built from hay bales. Her grandfather in the middle, his weathered hands resting proudly on her shoulders, flanked by her older brother. All of them smiling through the sunset glare. All of them sharing a legacy of marksmanship that stretched back generations. Her grandfather had passed last winter, his final words to her a reminder that true skill wasn't about showing off, it was about quiet, mastery and being ready when it mattered. Her brother had taken over the family business, hanging up his competition rifle to focus on more practical matters. According to his infrequent texts, he'd never been happier. She'd promised herself she'd honor her grandfather's legacy during this training. Not for recognition, not for some kind of closure that counselors talked about, but to prove to herself that she could still carry what he'd taught her forward into this new chapter of her life. Inside the range briefing area, portable heaters fought a losing battle against the damp chill. 2 instructors lounged against the wall, one scrolling through his phone with the bored efficiency of someone counting minutes until lunch, the other sipping coffee from a thermos that had seen better decades. "Can I help you?" Phone guy looked up, his tone carrying that particular brand of indifference that said he'd already categorized her as just another recruit before she'd even opened her mouth. Madison stood in front of them, neither requesting attention nor avoiding it. "Private Chen, reporting for marksmanship qualification, sir." She produced her range card, unfolded it once, and presented it with the corners aligned. "Slot scheduled for 0630. Coffee thermos guy looked her over like she was a puzzle missing several pieces, his eyes taking in her small stature, her lack of any visible confidence or nervousness, just calm readiness. "You're in Sergeant Blackwell's group?" he asked, skepticism evident in every syllable. "Yes, sir." "3rd Platoon, Charlie Company," she replied, her voice steady as a metronome. The 2 instructors exchanged glances, and Madison caught the look that passed between them. It was the same look she'd seen countless times before, the silent communication. between people who thought they already knew the limits of what stood before them. Phone guy checked her card with theatrical attention, then tossed it onto the table. Yeah, well, you're early. And in case you haven't noticed, it's coming down sideways out there. Might reschedule the whole morning. The range card states, all-weather qualification, sir, Madison said quietly, not moving from her position. Listen, Private, Coffee Thermos interjected, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been at Fort Benning long enough to know which battles were worth fighting. We've got visibility issues, safety concerns, and equipment that doesn't perform well when it's wetter than the Atlantic out there. This isn't about proving who's tough enough to stand in the rain. Madison didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't even change her expression. She simply retrieved her range card, folded it once along its original crease, and stepped back toward a metal bench positioned near the wall where she could watch recruits and instructors trickle in from the downpour. Wait it out if you want. Phone guy called after her, his voice carrying that particular smugness that comes from exercising small authorities. Weather report says rain till noon. Don't get your hopes up. She sat down, placed her gear at her feet, and folded her hands in her lap. From where she sat, she could see the firing range through rain-streaked windows, targets barely visible through the downpour. The distance markers disappeared into the gray haze of rainfall, making the range look infinite and impossible. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The two instructors returned to their conversation, shaking their heads and chuckling about eager recruits who thought Army training ran on their preferred schedule. Some people watch too many movies, one of them muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Madison closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her. The persistent drumming of rain on the metal roof, the squeak of wet boots on linoleum, the metallic click of weapons being checked and cleared. Sounds that had become familiar during her weeks of basic training. Sounds that connected her, however tenuously, to the memories of shooting with her grandfather in Minnesota downpours, when others would have stayed indoors. The minutes ticked by slowly in the clammy cold. Every so often, one of the instructors would glance her way and shake his head, like she was a minor inconvenience that would eventually resolve itself if they just waited long enough. Madison sat perfectly still, her breathing controlled and measured, her patience the kind that came from spending countless hours in hunting blinds where the smallest movement could alert prey. A drill sergeant entered, rainwater cascading from his campaign hat like a personal waterfall. He looked at Madison with narrowed eyes, taking in her stillness. The way someone could sit in the midst of chaotic activity without participating in it or being affected by it. Private, the drill sergeant said, slowing his stride. You got a reason to be sitting while everyone else is preparing? Madison opened her eyes. Waiting for range qualification, drill sergeant. Early arrival. The drill sergeant studied her for a moment longer than necessary, then gave a curt nod and continued toward the instructor's table. But he looked back twice before engaging in conversation with the range staff. Something about the way Private Chen sat there perfectly still in the midst of mounting activity reminded him of his grandfather. Old hunters had that same quality. They could wait forever if they had to, and they never seemed to doubt that their patience would eventually be rewarded. Inside the range office, the heaters hummed their losing battle against the Georgia damp. And Madison Chen continued to wait. She'd made a promise to someone who couldn't hear it anymore, and she intended to see it through, no matter how long it took, or how many people thought she was wasting her time. The firing range waited too, shrouded in rain, targets standing patient and ready. As more recruits filtered in, the room grew louder with the particular brand of nervous energy that preceded qualification tests. These were the moments that separated those who would excel from those who would merely pass, and everyone knew it. Range qualification wasn't just another box to check, it was the most fundamental skill of a soldier, the baseline expectation upon which everything else was built. The rain continued its assault on the metal roof, and the mood in the room darkened with each passing minute. Even the most confident recruits were eyeing the deluge with concern. Wet conditions meant poor visibility, slippery grips, and scores that rarely reflected true ability. Nobody wanted their permanent record to show qualification scores achieved. In what was quickly becoming monsoon-like conditions, Madison observed it all with quiet attention. The social dynamics of her platoon were as clear to her as the disassembled parts of a rifle. The natural leaders were already organizing their gear, controlling what they could in an uncontrollable situation. The followers were mirroring their actions, finding comfort in mimicry. The complainers were doing what they always did, finding reasons why today's test was unfair before it even began. Sergeant Blackwell entered at precisely 0625, his presence immediately changing the energy of the room. Unlike the range instructors, there was nothing casual about Blackwell's demeanor. Every movement was purposeful, every glance evaluative. He was the kind of drill sergeant that recruits simultaneously feared and respected, demanding but fair. Tough but never cruel. "Listen up," he announced, his voice cutting through the ambient noise without needing to shout. "Range qualification proceeds as scheduled. This isn't a water park, and you're not made of sugar, you won't melt." A collective groan rippled through the assembled recruits, quickly silenced by Blackwell's raised eyebrow. "The enemy doesn't stop shooting because of inclement weather," he continued, scanning the room. "Neither do we. Consider this a valuable training opportunity. In my experience, those who can shoot in this," he gestured toward the windows where rain continued to pound relentlessly, "can shoot in anything." Madison felt something shift in her chest at those words. Not excitement exactly, but a quiet recognition. Her grandfather had said almost the exact same thing to her when she was 12, standing in the Minnesota rain with a .22 rifle, learning to adjust for wind that changed direction without warning. "First relay on the line in 15 minutes, Blackwell announced. "Gear check now, weapon draw in 5, move with purpose." The room erupted into activity. Recruits rushed to organize rain gear, check ammunition pouches, and secure anything that might be compromised by the downpour. Madison stood and gathered her things with the same unhurried precision that characterized everything she did. Her waterproofing had been done the night before, her mental preparation completed in the quiet hours before dawn. Phone guy was watching her with renewed interest. Something about her lack of panic or complaint had finally registered as unusual. "You're really looking forward to this, aren't you, Private?" Madison met his gaze with neither challenge nor deference. "Just doing what's required, sir." "Well, good luck out there," he replied, his tone suggesting he thought she'd need more than luck. "Visibility's down to about 100 meters, and that's being generous." Madison nodded once and joined the line for weapon issue. Behind her, she could hear the instructors talking in low voices about the day's prospects. "We'll be lucky if half of them qualify first time in these conditions," Coffee Thermos was saying. "Might need to schedule a mass requalification for tomorrow. Blackwell's group is usually pretty solid," Phone Guy responded. "But yeah, this weather's going to separate the naturals from the try-hards real quick." Madison received her assigned M4 carbine with neither eagerness nor reluctance, just the focused attention of someone reuniting with a familiar tool. She conducted her function check methodically, each movement precise and economical. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish. Just the quiet competence of someone who understood that excellence was in the details. Sergeant Blackwell moved through the line, observing each recruit's preparation. When he reached Madison, he paused slightly longer than he had with the others. Not because she was doing anything wrong, but because she wasn't doing anything unnecessary. In a room full of nervous energy and wasted motion, Her economy of movement stood out like stillness in a storm. "Private Chen," he said, his voice neutral. "You ready for this?" "Yes, Drill Sergeant," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. Blackwell studied her for a moment longer. "Ever fired in conditions like this before?" "Yes, Drill Sergeant. Similar conditions." He nodded once, filed that information away, and continued down the line. Madison returned to her preparation, but she could feel something had changed. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, someone had asked her a question that hinted at recognition of her as an individual rather than just another recruit in a long line of faces. At 0645, despite the continuing downpour, the first relay moved to the firing line. Madison was assigned to the second relay, which meant she had time to observe how others handled the challenging conditions. She watched with the focused attention of someone gathering valuable intelligence. The rain created problems that went beyond the obvious. Visibility wasn't just compromised by the falling water. It was the inconsistent nature of that compromise that created the real challenge. One moment the targets were relatively clear, the next they were obscured by a gust-driven sheet of rain. Determining when to squeeze the trigger became as much about timing the weather as it was about marksmanship fundamentals. The first relay's scores were predictably poor. Even the platoon's best shooters were struggling to achieve minimal qualification. Standards. Frustration was evident in rigid shoulders and muttered curses as they returned to the covered area. Water streaming from their uniforms and disappointment evident in their postures. "Second relay on the line," Blackwell called, his voice carrying over the drumming rain. Madison moved forward with neither hesitation nor haste. She took her assigned position and began to prepare herself mentally in a way that had nothing to do with the formal training she'd received at Fort Benning and everything to do with winter mornings in Minnesota, learning to regulate her breathing. While her fingers grew numb with cold. "You nervous, Chen?" The recruit to her left was a tall Texan named Garcia, who had consistently scored at the top of their platoon during previous marksmanship exercises. "No," she replied simply, adjusting her position slightly to account for how the waterlogged ground had changed the stability of her stance. Garcia chuckled. "Well, you should be. This is some biblical-level rain." Rodriguez from first relay missed half his targets, and he could shoot the wings off a fly normally. Madison nodded acknowledgement, but offered no further conversation. Her focus had already narrowed to the task at hand, the feel of the weapon. The rhythm of the rain, the barely visible targets downrange that seemed to appear and disappear with each gust of wind. "Shooters ready," called the range master. "Watch your lanes. This is qualification fire. You will engage 40 targets. Standards remain unchanged despite conditions." Madison felt a familiar calm settle over her. The kind of tranquility that came not from absence of pressure, but from complete acceptance of it. In this moment, nothing existed beyond herself, her weapon, and the target she could sense more than see. "Commence fire when ready." The range erupted with the sharp cracks of M4 carbines. Most shooters were firing as soon as targets appeared, desperate to engage before the rain obscured their view again. Madison's approach was different. She waited, watched, felt the rhythm of the weather. Her first shot didn't come until nearly 10 seconds after the others had begun firing. But when she did fire, it was with a precision that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with the kind of patience that recognized the difference between an opportunity and the right opportunity. From the covered observation area, Sergeant Blackwell watched through rain-streaked binoculars. His attention had been drawn to Lane 7 Chun's position, not because of rapid firing, but because of its conspicuous restraint. While other recruits were burning through ammunition at the first glimpse of a target, Chun was waiting, firing single deliberate shots with significant pauses between them. "What's Private Chun doing?" Phone guy had joined Blackwell at the observation point, his earlier boredom replaced by genuine curiosity. Shooting, Blackwell replied simply, not lowering his binoculars. But she's barely firing. She's going to run out of time before she engages all 40 targets. Blackwell said nothing, just continued to observe. He'd been a drill sergeant long enough to recognize when something unusual was happening on his range. And right now, Lane 7 was definitely unusual. Madison continued her measured pace. Each shot was a complete action: acquire, breathe, squeeze, follow through, reset. She wasn't racing the course or the other shooters. She was simply executing with the same deliberate precision she applied to everything. The rain, rather than being an obstacle, became part of her calculation. She timed her shots to the brief windows of clarity between downpours, using the weather's rhythm to her advantage rather than fighting against it. When her magazine was empty, she reloaded with the same unhurried efficiency, her movements so smooth that the action barely interrupted her rhythm. No fumbling, no rushing, just the fluid motion of someone who had performed this action thousands of times until it became instinct rather than conscious thought. The qualification course continued, targets appearing and disappearing at varying distances through the rain. Other shooters began to show signs of frustration, muttered curses, tense shoulders, increasingly hurried shots as they fell behind the expected pace. Madison remained a study in controlled focus, her breathing as steady as her rate of fire. When the command finally came to cease fire, there was a moment of collective relief from most of the line. The qualification was over, for better or worse. But Madison's expression hadn't changed. She simply cleared her weapon with the same careful attention she'd given to firing it, her movements precise and methodical as she ensured it was safe before stepping back from the line. A software error. Exactly. The system thinks it has two sensors providing balanced readings, but actually, it's the same data duplicated. During landing, when the right strut compresses differently than expected, there's no independent verification. The chief mechanic looked skeptical but consulted his own tablet. After several minutes of examining the data, his expression changed. "I'll be damned. The secondary sensor is in a feedback loop with the primary. Can you fix it before the demonstration?" Harrington asked. "We need to reset the calibration and force each sensor to report independently." "Yes, it's doable." As they worked, word spread through the base about the waitress who was solving problems that had stumped military technicians. Sophia felt both exhilarated and uncomfortable under the attention, keeping her focus on the aircraft systems rather than the whispers around her. By noon, both repairs had proven successful. Reynolds' F-22 passed a high-G test flight with no power fluctuations, and the landing gear on the fifth aircraft was responding properly with independent sensor readings. 5 aircraft, Harrington announced to the Pentagon officials who had arrived to observe the progress. "One short of our target, but enough to proceed with a modified demonstration." Secretary Davis nodded, eyeing Sophia with newfound respect. "Impressive troubleshooting, Ms. Morgan. Where did you receive your training?" "My apartment, sir." "Flight simulators, technical manuals, and online forums." Davis raised an eyebrow. "Unconventional, but effective," Harrington added. As the maintenance crews prepared the aircraft for the afternoon demonstration, Sophia found herself at a strange threshold, allowed onto the base, her knowledge validated, yet still an outsider. She would return to the diner tomorrow, serving coffee to pilots who might view her differently now, but who would still fly while she remained grounded. The thought settled like a weight in her chest. She stood near the hangar entrance, watching the activity on the tarmac, feeling the familiar ache of being so close to flight, yet forever separated from it. "Ms. Morgan." Harrington approached, his expression unreadable. "We still have a problem." "The 6th aircraft?" "No, Captain Martinez," Sophia frowned. "I thought we fixed his landing gear issue." "We did. But he was injured during a physical training exercise an hour ago. Broken wrist. He can't fly." That leaves you with 5 pilots for 5 aircraft, Sophia said, not understanding the problem. No, Harrington corrected. The demonstration requires all 6 aircraft. We were going to have Reynolds fly the repaired jet after his regular demonstration duties, but with the tight schedule, he paused, studying her. How good is your simulation experience, exactly? Sophia stared at Harrington, her mind racing to process his implication. Sir, if you're suggesting what I think you are, I'm not suggesting anything yet. Harrington replied, his voice lowered. I'm asking about your simulation experience. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Over 5,000 hours in military aircraft simulators, primarily 5th-generation fighters. Around 2,000 specifically in F-22 simulations with realistic systems modeling. Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. That's more than some of our pilots. It's different in a real aircraft, Sophia acknowledged, trying to keep her voice steady. Despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The G-forces, the vibrations, the sensory input, you can't fully simulate those. No, he agreed, but the fundamentals remain the same. A senior officer approached, interrupting their conversation. Colonel, we have another problem. The 6th aircraft has a cracked canopy seal. Maintenance says it can't be properly repaired. Before the demonstration, Harrington's jaw tightened. Are you certain? Yes, sir. It would compromise cabin pressure at demonstration altitudes. Then we're down to 5 aircraft. Harrington sighed, running a hand through his close-cropped hair. We'll need to modify the demonstration profile again. The officer nodded and departed, leaving Sophia and Harrington alone again. Sophia could feel the weight of the moment. The demonstration was crucial for funding. Careers hung in the balance, and she stood at an unexpected crossroads. Ms. Morgan, Harrington said finally, thank you for your assistance today. You've helped save this demonstration from complete failure. She recognized a dismissal when she heard one. Happy to help, Colonel. Sophia turned to leave, feeling a complex mix of pride and disappointment. For a brief moment, she thought Harrington might actually be considering letting her. But no, that would be impossible, irresponsible. She was a waitress with self-taught knowledge, not a trained military pilot. Ms. Morgan, Harrington called after her, one more thing. She turned back. How would you feel about sitting in an actual F-22 cockpit? Not flying, he clarified quickly. Just to compare it to your simulation. Something in his expression made her pulse quicken. I'd like that very much, sir. 20 minutes later, Sophia found herself climbing the ladder to the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor. Not one of the demonstration aircraft. This one was undergoing routine maintenance, its engine modules removed. It couldn't fly, but its cockpit systems were fully operational for testing. Go ahead, the crew chief said, gesturing to the open cockpit. Colonel says you can sit in it for a few minutes. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she lowered herself into the seat. The cockpit wrapped around her like a glove, both familiar from thousands of simulated hours and startlingly new. The control stick felt different under her fingers, more substantial, more real. The heads-up display glass was clearer than any monitor could replicate. May I? She asked, gesturing to the startup sequence. The crew chief hesitated, then nodded. Systems only. No engine start, obviously. Sophia's fingers moved across the controls with practiced precision, bringing the avionics to life. Displays illuminated, showing system status, fuel levels, weapons configuration. She ran through the pre-flight checklist from memory, each switch and button exactly where she expected it to be. You've done this before, the crew chief observed, his initial skepticism giving way to curiosity. Only in simulation, Sophia replied, her focus on the displays. But I've done it thousands of times. She continued through the checklist, noting small differences between her simulator and the real aircraft. The throttle had more resistance than she expected. The seat conformed to her body differently. The environmental controls were more responsive. "Your simulator must be pretty sophisticated," the crew chief commented. "I've been building and refining it for 15 years, Sophia replied, running her fingertips reverently over the instrument panel. "But it's still just an approximation." A shadow fell across the cockpit. Sophia looked up to see Colonel Harrington standing on the maintenance platform beside the aircraft, watching her with intense focus. "How does it compare?" he asked. "Similar in layout and function, different in feel." She gestured to the controls. "The physical feedback is more nuanced. The sensory experience is richer." Harrington nodded, then turned to the crew chief. "Give us a minute." When they were alone, Harrington leaned closer to the cockpit, his voice low. "The Pentagon team is insistent on seeing a 6-aircraft demonstration. The funding for the entire program depends on it." Sophia waited, sensing there was more. "The 6th aircraft, the one with the canopy seal issue, can't fly at demonstration altitude, but it could fly a modified profile. Lower altitude, limited maneuvers." The implication hung in the air between them. Sophia's mouth went dry. "Colonel, are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything officially," Harrington interrupted. "I'm thinking aloud about possibilities in a crisis situation." "I'm not a military pilot," Sophia said, stating the obvious. "I don't have clearance. I don't have training. I've never experienced actual G-forces." "All true." Harrington's gaze was unwavering. "I'm simply wondering if someone with, say, 2,000 hours of simulator experience in this specific aircraft might be capable of executing basic maneuvers in a controlled environment with an experienced pilot providing real-time guidance via radio." Sophia's heart pounded so loudly she was certain Harrington could hear it. "That would be highly irregular, sir." "Yes, it would." He straightened up. "Completely hypothetical, of course." "Of course," she echoed, her mind racing. "Ms. Morgan, if such a hypothetical scenario were to occur, what would be your primary concerns?" She didn't hesitate. "G-force. Management. Real-world turbulence response. Emergency protocols if something goes wrong." Harrington nodded. "Reasonable concerns. Hypothetically speaking, if the profile were limited to 3G maximum, with no complex maneuvers and constant communication with the tower, those risks might be mitigated." "They might," she agreed carefully. "The demonstration begins in 3 hours, Harrington said, checking his watch. "I need to brief the team on our modified 5-aircraft profile." He turned to leave, then paused. "The 6th aircraft will be on the flight line, fueled and ready in case we resolve the canopy issue. Cockpit access code is 4789. He walked away, leaving Sophia alone in the cockpit, her mind reeling with possibilities and implications. She ran her hands over the controls once more, feeling the solidity of what had previously existed only in simulation for her. The choice before her was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating, a chance to finally fly, but with risks that couldn't be understated. Madison neither confirmed nor denied this, simply continuing her evening routine with the same focused efficiency that characterized everything she did. Her apparent indifference to her own achievement only fueled the curiosity of those around. "Come on, Chen," pressed Garcia, who had become something of a self-appointed spokesman for the group's curiosity. "You've got to give us something. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Madison looked up, seeming to realize that simple deflection wasn't going to satisfy the interest she'd generated. She sat on her bunk, hands folded in her lap, and spoke, quietly enough that people had to lean in to hear. "My grandfather started teaching me when I was 6, she said, her voice carrying no hint of boastfulness, just stating facts. He believed marksmanship wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about understanding yourself. Your breathing, your pulse, your thoughts. Control those, and the bullet goes where it should." 6 years old? Someone whispered. With what, a BB gun? Started with a pellet rifle, Madison confirmed. By 8, I was shooting, 22 with his supervision. 12 was when he took me hunting for the first time. 16 was competitive shooting, though mostly local events. So you're like some kind of shooting prodigy, Garcia concluded. Madison shook her head firmly. No, I just had good teaching and consistent practice. My grandfather used to say there's no such thing as natural talent, just natural dedication. Anyone here could shoot the way I do with enough deliberate practice. Yeah, right, someone scoffed from across the bay. 10 years of training before we even got here. It's not about the years, Madison insisted, a rare intensity entering her voice. It's about the approach. Most people practice until they get it right once. Effective practice means continuing until you can't get it wrong, even under the worst conditions. Her words hung in the air, carrying the weight of demonstrable truth. She had just proven exactly that premise earlier in the day, performing flawlessly, when conditions had reduced everyone else's effectiveness. So what's the secret? Asked Diaz, leaning forward eagerly. What were you doing out there that the rest of us weren't? Madison considered the question seriously. Respecting the fundamentals, not fighting the conditions, but adapting to them. Mostly not rushing shots I wasn't certain of. Better to wait for the right moment than to waste ammunition on low probability attempts. It was the most anyone had heard her speak since basic training began, and despite the simplicity of her explanation, there was something compelling about it. Perhaps it was the quiet conviction behind her words, or the fact that she had demonstrated the truth of what she was saying in the most convincing way possible. Blackwell said you're teaching a class tomorrow morning, Garcia said. You nervous about that? Something like amusement flickered across Madison's face. I'm more comfortable behind a rifle than talking about one, but if it helps the platoon improve, I'll manage. The conversation might have continued, but the lights flickered, the 5-minute warning before lights out. As the bay erupted into the controlled chaos of final preparations for bed, Madison returned to her evening routine, the momentary spotlight shifting away from her, just as she preferred. In her bunk that night, surrounded by the sounds of 30 other women settling into sleep, Madison stared at the ceiling and thought about her grandfather. How he would have smiled at today's events, not because of the record or the recognition, but because she had honored his most fundamental teaching excellence. Isn't about showing off. It's about being prepared when the moment calls for your best. She reached beneath her pillow and touched the bronze medal she kept there, her silent connection to the man who had shaped her understanding of discipline and precision. Steady hands, steady heart, she whispered, repeating his favorite mantra. The words carried her into sleep as the rain continued its steady drumming on the barracks roof. The morning arrived cold and gray, the rain having finally exhausted itself sometime during the night. In its place was a heavy mist that hung over the training grounds like a ghostly presence, reducing visibility to less than 200 meters in any direction. Perfect conditions, as Sergeant Blackwell noted with satisfaction, for demonstrating the principles of shooting in adverse weather. Madison was already at the range when the rest of the platoon arrived, having been escorted there 30 minutes. Early to prepare. She stood by the firing line, her posture relaxed but alert, seemingly unaffected by the cold or the responsibility that had been placed on her shoulders. What the others couldn't see was the careful mental preparation she had been conducting since waking. The measured breathing exercises her grandfather had taught her. The visualization techniques that allowed her to see successful shots before ever touching the trigger. The centering ritual that cleared her mind of everything except the task at hand. Sergeant Blackwell addressed the gathered platoon, his voice carrying across the misty field. Yesterday, Private Chen demonstrated exceptional marksmanship under conditions that challenged even our most experienced shooters. Today, she's going to share some of the techniques that made that possible. He turned to Madison. Private, The range is yours." Madison stepped forward, her expression revealing nothing of the discomfort she felt at being the center of attention. When she spoke, however, her voice carried a quiet authority that came from absolute confidence in what she was saying. "Marksmanship isn't about perfect conditions," she began, echoing words her grandfather had spoken to her countless times. "It's about adapting to whatever conditions you face. The fundamentals remain the same. It's your application that changes." She demonstrated proper stance modifications for wet or muddy ground, explaining how stability could be maintained even when the surface beneath you was compromised. She showed how to adjust grip when hands were cold or wet, emphasizing the importance of consistent pressure despite physical discomfort. Most importantly, she addressed the mental aspects of shooting in adverse conditions, the patience required to wait for visibility windows, the discipline to maintain focus despite environmental distractions, the confidence to trust your training when everything around you suggested failure was imminent. "Your breathing changes everything," she explained, demonstrating the controlled respiratory pattern her grandfather had taught her. "Inhale slowly through your nose, exhale even more slowly through your mouth. Find the natural pause between breaths. That's your moment of maximum stability." The platoon watched with focused attention as Madison moved from explanation to demonstration. Sergeant Blackwell had set up a qualification course modified to emphasize the challenges of low visibility and changing conditions. With her rifle at the ready, Madison walked the group through her approach, verbalizing her thought process as she engaged targets that appeared and disappeared in the morning mist. "Notice how she's not rushing," Blackwell commented as Madison waited patiently for a distant target to become more visible. "She's reading the conditions, finding the rhythm of the environment." When Madison finally squeezed the trigger, the shot found center mass with the same precision she had demonstrated the previous day. Not luck, not chance, but the inevitable result of proper preparation meeting disciplined execution. For the next hour, Madison continued her demonstration, covering techniques for different ranges, positions, and environmental challenges. She spoke little, preferring to show rather than tell, but when she did speak, her words carried the weight of practical experience rather than theoretical knowledge. As the session neared its conclusion, Captain Rivera appeared at the range, accompanied by several officers Madison didn't recognize. They observed from a distance, their expressions professional but interested. "Now," Blackwell announced, "each of you will have the opportunity to apply these principles. Private Chen will provide individual coaching as you rotate through the firing line." What followed was unlike any training session the platoon had experienced. Madison moved from recruit to recruit, her guidance specific and practical. She didn't offer generic encouragement or vague advice. Instead, she identified precise adjustments each person needed to make: a slight change in elbow position, a modification to breathing rhythm, a shift in visual focus. With Garcia, who had consistently scored well but plateaued below expert level, she spent several minutes adjusting his trigger control. "You're anticipating the shot," she explained quietly. "Feel the pressure building, but don't predict when it will break. Let each firing be a surprise, even to yourself." With Diaz, who struggled with consistency at longer ranges, she focused on breathing discipline. "Your respiratory pattern changes when you're nervous," Madison observed. 3 breaths before you engage. Same depth, same duration, every time. Make it automatic." The improvements were immediate and undeniable. Recruits who had been frustrated by yesterday's conditions were now hitting targets with growing confidence. Not at Madison's level, that would take more than one training session, but with marked improvement over their previous performance. Captain Rivera approached Sergeant Blackwell as the training continued. "Impressive," she commented, watching Madison guide a struggling recruit through proper sight alignment. Not just her shooting, but her ability to communicate the principles effectively. Blackwell nodded. "She's not a natural teacher too." reserved for that, but she knows her subject so thoroughly that it compensates for any lack of instructional experience. Has she indicated any interest in specialized training paths? Rivera asked, keeping her voice low. Not explicitly, Blackwell replied. She's focused on meeting basic requirements like everyone else. But her file indicates she scored exceptionally high on the ASVAB. She qualifies for pretty much any MEO she might want. Rivera made another note in her file. Keep me updated on her progress. Talent like that shouldn't be overlooked. As the morning session concluded, the platoon gathered for a final debrief. The mood was noticeably different from the previous day, where there had been frustration and resignation about the challenging conditions. There was now a sense of accomplishment and renewed confidence. What Private Chen demonstrated today isn't magic, Blackwell emphasized, addressing the group. It's the result of disciplined practice and respect for fundamentals. Each of you has the capacity to reach this level of proficiency if you're willing to put in the work. He turned to Madison, who had resumed her position at the edge of the formation, neither seeking attention nor avoiding responsibility. Private, well done. You've provided valuable instruction to your fellow soldiers. Thank you, Drill Sergeant, she replied simply, her expression revealing nothing of what she might be feeling. As the platoon was dismissed to their next training, evolution, Madison found herself momentarily alone by the firing line. She knelt to collect spent brass, a habit ingrained from years of accompanying her grandfather to ranges where leaving your area clean was as important as accurate shooting. Private Chen. Madison looked up to find Captain Rivera standing nearby, her posture casual but her gaze evaluative. Captain, Madison acknowledged, immediately rising to attention. At ease, Rivera said with a slight smile. I wanted to compliment you on your performance, both yesterday and today. It's not often we see that level of skill in a basic trainee. Thank you, ma'am, Madison replied, her voice revealing neither pride nor false modesty. I'm curious, Rivera continued, studying Madison with genuine interest. With your background and obvious aptitude, you could have pursued competitive shooting at a high level. What brought you to the Army instead? The question caught Madison slightly off guard. It was more personal than anything she'd been asked. Since arriving at Fort Benning, and it touched on considerations she rarely discussed with others. My grandfather served, she said after a moment's consideration. 2 tours in Vietnam as a combat infantryman. He believed that skill should serve a purpose greater than trophies or recognition. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. When he passed last year, I found myself re-evaluating what I wanted my life to stand for. The discipline and precision he taught me seemed better directed toward service than competition. Rivera nodded, seeming to find something significant in Madison's answer. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. I imagine he'd be proud of what you demonstrated here today. He wouldn't be impressed by the shooting itself, Madison replied with unexpected candor. That was just meeting his standard. But using those skills to help others improve, that would have mattered to him. Well, he clearly instilled values along with those skills, Rivera observed. Keep up the good work, Private. The Army needs soldiers who understand that excellence isn't just about personal achievement. It's about elevating those around you. With that, the captain departed, leaving Madison to finish collecting the brass and contemplate the unexpected direction her day had taken. She had arrived at basic training determined to blend in, to fulfill her obligations without drawing attention. Now less than halfway through the cycle, she had inadvertently distinguished herself in ways that would follow her beyond Fort Benning. As she walked back toward the barracks, Madison felt the weight of her grandfather's medal in her pocket. She had carried it as a reminder of his standards, his expectations. Today, for the first time, she wondered if perhaps she was also carrying forward his legacy in ways she hadn't fully appreciated before. The platoon's attitude toward Madison shifted subtly but significantly after the morning's training session. Where there had been curiosity tinged with skepticism, there was now a quiet respect. She wasn't treated with the false deference often accorded to those with special talents, but rather with the genuine appreciation reserved for those who use their abilities to benefit others. During evening personal time, several recruits approached her with specific questions about marksmanship fundamentals. Madison answered each one with the same patient attention, neither minimizing her knowledge nor presenting it as something unattainable by others. The trick with trigger control, she explained to a small group gathered around her bunk, is understanding that it's not just about your finger. It's about isolating that movement from everything else your body is doing. She demonstrated with her hand, showing how the index finger could move independently while the rest of the hand remained perfectly still. Practice this whenever you have downtime. Standing in formation, waiting in the chow line before falling asleep. Make it so natural that you don't have to think about it when you're actually shooting. Garcia, who had become something of a bridge between Madison and the more socially oriented members of the platoon, watched these impromptu lessons with growing appreciation. "You know, Chun," he said when the group had dispersed, "you could be really good at this. The teaching part. I mean..." Madison looked up from the notebook where she had been sketching sight alignment diagrams for a struggling recruit. "I'm just sharing what I know." "Yeah, but you do it differently than the drill sergeants," Garcia persisted. "You don't make people feel stupid for not getting it right away. You just show them the path to improvement, one step at a time." Madison considered this observation. "That's how my grandfather taught me. He believed shame was the enemy of learning. Said if you make someone feel bad about where they are, they'll never focus enough to get where they need to be." "Smart man," Garcia commented. "My dad was a good shooter too, but he had no patience for teaching. Just expected perfection from the start." "Perfection isn't a starting point," Madison replied, echoing another of her grandfather's favorite sayings. "It's a direction you keep moving toward, knowing you'll never quite arrive." As lights out approached, Madison found herself reflecting on the unexpected turns the past 2 days had taken. She had come to Fort Benning with a clear plan fulfill. Her obligation, honor her grandfather's memory, and find her place in the institution he had respected. She hadn't anticipated becoming a teacher or a record holder, or the subject of special attention from the company command. In the darkness of the barracks, listening to the soft sounds of her platoon settling into sleep, Madison allowed herself a rare moment of uncertainty. The path ahead seemed suddenly less clear, the expectations higher, the scrutiny more intense. Success had created complications she hadn't prepared for. The third week after Madison's record-setting performance brought a new challenge to Charlie Company: advanced marksmanship training. While basic qualification focused on fundamentals at known distances with stable firing positions, this next phase introduced variables that tested even experienced shooters. Move-in targets, unconventional positions, stress shooting under physical exertion, all designed to separate those with merely adequate skills from those with true potential. The morning dawned clear and cold, the Georgia winter finally asserting itself with temperatures that left frost glittering on the training grounds. Breath-formed visible clouds as the platoon assembled for the day's instructions, their anticipation evident in their alert postures and focused expressions. This wasn't standard training. This was the opportunity to distinguish themselves before advanced training selections began. Master Sergeant Winters, the marksmanship chief for the battalion, stood before them like a statue carved from granite. At 52, he was a living legend on post, a former special operations sniper with multiple combat deployments and a reputation for brutal honesty about a shooter's capabilities. "Listen up," he began, his voice carrying the particular gravitas that came from decades of experience. "What you've learned so far is how to hit stationary targets under predictable conditions. That's kindergarten. Today we move to high school." He gestured toward the modified range behind him, where moving targets, barricades, and obstacle courses had transformed the familiar landscape into something far more challenging. In real-world engagements, you don't get a perfect prone position, and all the time in the world to align your shot. You're winded, you're under pressure, you're shooting from awkward positions with environmental factors you can't control. Today's course is designed to simulate those conditions. Madison listened with focused attention, cataloging each element of the course and mentally preparing for the adjustments she would need to make. That's a quality that can't be taught. It can only be developed through experience and disciplined practice. He turned to address the entire assembled group. "Pay attention to what you just witnessed. Private Chen didn't just demonstrate technical proficiency. She showed the mental discipline that separates competent shooters from exceptional ones. The ability to maintain focus despite distractions, to adapt to changing conditions without abandoning fundamentals, to perform under pressure, without allowing that pressure to affect execution. These are the qualities that matter when the stakes are real." As the day continued and other recruits ran the course, none with modifications as challenging as Madison's, the atmosphere among Charlie Company had shifted noticeably. There was a new standard of possibility in the air, a recognition that excellence wasn't just a theoretical concept, but something tangible that had been demonstrated before their eyes. During the lunch break, Madison found herself approached by Master Sergeant Winters as she sat slightly apart from the main group, reviewing her performance mentally and identifying areas for improvement. "Mind if I join you, Private?" he asked, his tone more conversational than it had been during the formal instruction. "Of course not, Master Sergeant," Madison replied, immediately making room on the bench. Winters sat with the careful movement of someone who had spent decades carrying heavy gear, and whose body reminded him of that fact daily. He studied Madison for a moment before speaking. "Your file says you're from northern Minnesota." "Small town called Elk River," Madison nodded. "Yes, Master Sergeant. Population about 25,000. "I know it," Winters said, surprising her. "Competed in a regional shooting match there about 15 years ago. Huntington Memorial Range, just outside of town." "My grandfather's range," Madison said quietly, a mixture of surprise and something like homecoming in her voice. "He established it in 1987. Harold Chun," Winters nodded. "I remember him. Tough judge, excellent shooter. He ran a clinic on wind reading that changed my approach to long-distance shooting." Madison felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. Pride, loss, connection, all mingled together. "You knew." "My grandfather? Not well," Winters clarified, "but enough to recognize his expertise. And now, watching you shoot, I see his influence clearly. The same disciplined approach, the same respect for fundamentals, the same calm under pressure." He leaned forward slightly. "Your grandfather used to say something that stuck with me. Marksmanship isn't about the target, it's about the space between breaths." Madison smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her usually composed features. "The stillness between heartbeats," she added, completing the phrase she had heard hundreds of times. "Exactly," Winters confirmed. "I've been teaching marksmanship for over 20 years, and I've encountered maybe a dozen shooters with your potential. What I haven't often seen is potential combined with the kind of mental discipline you demonstrated today." His tone became more direct. "The Army has specialized paths for soldiers with your particular skill set. Pathways that would challenge you far beyond what standard infantry training might offer." Madison considered this carefully. "I joined to serve effectively, Master Sergeant. If my skills can be useful in specialized roles, I'm open to considering those pathways." "Good," Winters nodded. "Because I've already spoken with Captain Rivera about recommending you for advanced assessment after you complete basic. Your performance today confirmed what your qualification scores suggested." He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. Keep doing what you're doing, Private. And remember that the skills your grandfather taught you aren't just about hitting targets. They're about the kind of soldier, the kind of person you're capable of becoming. As Winters walked away, Madison remained on the bench, turning his words over in her mind. When she had enlisted, she had imagined a straightforward path: complete her training, serve her term, honor her grandfather's legacy through disciplined service. The possibility of specialized roles, of using her skills in ways she hadn't anticipated, opened new considerations that both excited and unsettled her. That evening in the barracks, the atmosphere had changed subtly but significantly. Madison was still Madison, quiet, focused, more comfortable observing than participating, but the way others interacted with her had evolved. The novelty of her shooting performance had been replaced by something more substantial: genuine respect. "Chun," Garcia called from across the bay as they prepared for lights out. "Some of us are struggling with the transition between firing positions on the course. Any chance you could show us some techniques tomorrow during personal time?" Madison looked up from where she was organizing her gear for the next day. "Of course. The key is maintaining your sight picture during movement, not just before and after." "That's exactly what I'm struggling with," Diaz admitted. "I either move too fast and lose alignment, or aim too long and run out of time." "It's about finding the balance point," Madison explained, unconsciously echoing her grandfather's teaching style. "Not rushing, but not hesitating either. I can demonstrate tomorrow." As the conversation continued, with more recruits joining to ask specific questions about aspects of the course, Madison found herself in an unfamiliar but not uncomfortable position, sharing knowledge she had accumulated over years of dedicated practice, watching understanding dawn in others' eyes as concepts clicked into place. This was different from the formal demonstration she had conducted on the range. That had been an assignment, a requirement. This was something else, a natural exchange between peers, a sharing of hard-earned wisdom, not to impress, but to elevate. It reminded her of evenings in her grandfather's workshop, where local hunters and competitive shooters would gather to discuss techniques, to learn from each other's experiences, to collectively improve their craft. Later, as the lights dimmed and the barracks settled into the quiet of approaching sleep, Madison found herself reflecting on the unexpected trajectory her military experience was taking. She had come to Fort Benning determined to honor her grandfather's legacy through quiet excellence and disciplined service. What she hadn't anticipated was how that legacy might expand beyond her personal performance to influence those around her. Perhaps she realized this was what her grandfather had been preparing her for all along. Not just to be an exceptional shooter, but to carry forward the principles he had lived by: disciplined practice, respect for fundamentals, calm under pressure, and most importantly, the willingness to share knowledge rather than hoard it as a source of personal advantage. The bronze medal still rested in her pocket, a tangible connection to the man who had shaped her understanding of excellence. But now it represented something more than personal achievement or family legacy. It symbolized a continuity of values that extended beyond bloodlines or competition results, values that found their truest expression in service to others. Madison Chen closed her eyes, her breathing falling into the measured rhythm that had become second nature through years of practice. As sleep approached, she felt a sense of purpose more clearly defined than when she had first arrived at Fort Benning. The path ahead might hold challenges and opportunities she hadn't anticipated, but the principles that would guide her remained as clear and consistent as her grandfather's voice in her memory. Excellence isn't a destination. It's a continuous journey. And the most meaningful journeys are those that help others find their way. The following morning brought news that spread through the company with the efficiency of military gossip. Special observers would be attending the day's training evolution. This wasn't entirely unusual. Fort Benning regularly hosted visitors from other branches, foreign military liaisons, and specialized units looking to identify promising candidates. But the timing, coming immediately after Madison's performance on the advanced course, created a buzz of speculation. "I heard it's Special Forces talent scouts," Garcia whispered during morning formation. "They sometimes pull exceptional candidates directly from basic if they show enough potential." "That's just a rumor," Diaz countered. "More likely it's instructors from advanced training units evaluating the program." Sergeant Blackwell's arrival silenced the chatter. His expression revealed nothing as he conducted the standard morning accountability and prepared the platoon for movement to the training area. If he knew anything about the special observers, he wasn't sharing that information with his recruits. The morning's evolution focused on team movement and coordinated fire exercises, scenarios where pairs of shooters had to communicate effectively while navigating obstacles and engaging targets in sequence. It was a natural progression from the previous day's individual assessments, emphasizing that combat effectiveness depended on collective performance, not just personal skill. Madison was paired with Rodriguez, whose shooting had improved significantly since receiving coaching from her during personal time. They worked well together, with Madison's calm precision complementing Rodriguez's quick target acquisition and rapid follow-up shots. That's a quality that can't be taught. It can only be developed through experience and disciplined practice. He turned to address the entire assembled group. "Pay attention to what you just witnessed. Private Chen didn't just demonstrate technical proficiency. She showed the mental discipline that separates competent shooters from exceptional ones. The ability to maintain focus despite distractions, to adapt to changing conditions without abandoning fundamentals, to perform under pressure, without allowing that pressure to affect execution. These are the qualities that matter when the stakes are real." As the day continued and other recruits ran the course, none with modifications as challenging as Madison's, the atmosphere among Charlie Company had shifted noticeably. There was a new standard of possibility in the air, a recognition that excellence wasn't just a theoretical concept, but something tangible that had been demonstrated before their eyes. During the lunch break, Madison found herself approached by Master Sergeant Winters as she sat slightly apart from the main group, reviewing her performance mentally and identifying areas for improvement. "Mind if I join you, Private?" he asked, his tone more conversational than it had been during the formal instruction. "Of course not, Master Sergeant," Madison replied, immediately making room on the bench. Winters sat with the careful movement of someone who had spent decades carrying heavy gear, and whose body reminded him of that fact daily. He studied Madison for a moment before speaking. "Your file says you're from northern Minnesota." "Small town called Elk River," Madison nodded. "Yes, Master Sergeant. Population about 25,000. "I know it," Winters said, surprising her. "Competed in a regional shooting match there about 15 years ago. Huntington Memorial Range, just outside of town." "My grandfather's range," Madison said quietly, a mixture of surprise and something like homecoming in her voice. "He established it in 1987. Harold Chun," Winters nodded. "I remember him. Tough judge, excellent shooter. He ran a clinic on wind reading that changed my approach to long-distance shooting." Madison felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. Pride, loss, connection, all mingled together. "You knew my grandfather?" "Not well," Winters clarified, "but enough to recognize his expertise. And now, watching you shoot, I see his influence clearly. The same disciplined approach, the same respect for fundamentals, the same calm under pressure." He leaned forward slightly. "Your grandfather used to say something that stuck with me. Marksmanship isn't about the target, it's about the space between breaths." Madison smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her usually composed features. "The stillness between heartbeats," she added, completing the phrase she had heard hundreds of times. "Exactly," Winters confirmed. I've been teaching marksmanship for over 20 years, and I've encountered maybe a dozen shooters with your potential. What I haven't often seen is potential combined with the kind of mental discipline you demonstrated today." His tone became more direct. "The Army has specialized paths for soldiers with your particular skill set. Pathways that would challenge you far beyond what standard infantry training might offer." Madison considered this carefully. "I joined to serve effectively, Master Sergeant. If my skills can be useful in specialized roles, I'm open to considering those pathways." "Good," Winters nodded. "Because I've already spoken with Captain Rivera about recommending you for advanced assessment after you complete basic. Your performance today confirmed what your qualification scores suggested." He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Keep doing what you're doing, Private. And remember that the skills your grandfather taught you aren't just about hitting targets. They're about the kind of soldier, the kind of person you're capable of becoming." As Winters walked away, Madison remained on the bench, turning his words over in her mind. When she had enlisted, she had imagined a straightforward path: complete her training, serve her term, honor her grandfather's legacy through disciplined service. The possibility of specialized roles, of using her skills in ways she hadn't anticipated, opened new considerations that both excited and unsettled her. That evening in the barracks, the atmosphere had changed subtly but significantly. Madison was still Madison, quiet, focused, more comfortable observing than participating, but the way others interacted with her had evolved. The novelty of her shooting performance had been replaced by something more substantial: genuine respect. "Chun," Garcia called from across the bay as they prepared for lights out. "Some of us are struggling with the transition between firing positions on the course. Any chance you could show us some techniques tomorrow during personal time?" Madison looked up from where she was organizing her gear for the next day. "Of course. The key is maintaining your sight picture during movement, not just before and after." "That's exactly what I'm struggling with," Diaz admitted. "I either move too fast and lose alignment, or aim too long and run out of time." "It's about finding the balance point," Madison explained, unconsciously echoing her grandfather's teaching style. "Not rushing, but not hesitating either. I can demonstrate tomorrow." As the conversation continued, with more recruits joining to ask specific questions about aspects of the course, Madison found herself in an unfamiliar but not uncomfortable position, sharing knowledge she had accumulated over years of dedicated practice, watching understanding dawn in others' eyes as concepts clicked into place. This was different from the formal demonstration she had conducted on the range. That had been an assignment, a requirement. This was something else, a natural exchange between peers, a sharing of hard-earned wisdom, not to impress, but to elevate. It reminded her of evenings in her grandfather's workshop, where local hunters and competitive shooters would gather to discuss techniques, to learn from each other's experiences, to collectively improve their craft. Later, as the lights dimmed and the barracks settled into the quiet of approaching sleep, Madison found herself reflecting on the unexpected trajectory her military experience was taking. She had come to Fort Benning determined to honor her grandfather's legacy through quiet excellence and disciplined service. What she hadn't anticipated was how that legacy might expand beyond her personal performance to influence those around her. Perhaps she realized this was what her grandfather had been preparing her for all along. Not just to be an exceptional shooter, but to carry forward the principles he had lived by: disciplined practice, respect for fundamentals, calm under pressure, and most importantly, the willingness to share knowledge rather than hoard it as a source of personal advantage. The bronze medal still rested in her pocket, a tangible connection to the man who had shaped her understanding of excellence. But now it represented something more than personal achievement or family legacy. It symbolized a continuity of values that extended beyond bloodlines or competition results, values that found their truest expression in service to others. Madison Chen closed her eyes, her breathing falling into the measured rhythm that had become second nature through years of practice. As sleep approached, she felt a sense of purpose more clearly defined than when she had first arrived at Fort Benning. The path ahead might hold challenges and opportunities she hadn't anticipated, but the principles that would guide her remained as clear and consistent as her grandfather's voice in her memory. Excellence isn't a destination. It's a continuous journey. And the most meaningful journeys are those that help others find their way. The following morning brought news that spread through the company with the efficiency of military gossip. Special observers would be attending the day's training evolution. This wasn't entirely unusual. Fort Benning regularly hosted visitors from other branches, foreign military liaisons, and specialized units looking to identify promising candidates. But the timing, coming immediately after Madison's performance on the advanced course, created a buzz of speculation. "I heard it's Special Forces talent scouts," Garcia whispered during morning formation. "They sometimes pull exceptional candidates directly from basic if they show enough potential." "That's just a rumor," Diaz countered. "More likely it's instructors from advanced training units evaluating the program." Sergeant Blackwell's arrival silenced the chatter. His expression revealed nothing as he conducted the standard morning accountability and prepared the platoon for movement to the training area. If he knew anything about the special observers, he wasn't sharing that information with his recruits. The morning's evolution focused on team movement and coordinated fire exercises, scenarios where pairs of shooters had to communicate effectively while navigating obstacles and engaging targets in sequence. It was a natural progression from the previous day's individual assessments, emphasizing that combat effectiveness depended on collective performance, not just personal skill. Madison was paired with Rodriguez, whose shooting had improved significantly since receiving coaching from her during personal time. They worked well together, with Madison's calm precision complementing Rodriguez's quick target acquisition and rapid follow-up shots. As they moved through the course, Madison became aware of a group of observers on the elevated platform typically reserved for senior cadre. 4 figures in combat uniforms without identifying insignia or unit patches, the deliberate anonymity that often signaled specialized units. They watched the exercises with focused attention, occasionally making notes or exchanging quiet comments. One observer in particular, a woman with the weathered complexion of someone who had spent significant time in harsh environments, seemed to be paying special attention to Madison's team. Her scrutiny wasn't casual or general. It was the evaluative assessment of someone looking for specific qualities and capabilities. During a brief break between iterations, Sergeant Blackwell approached Madison and Rodriguez. "Good communication on that last sequence," he noted, his tone professional but approving. "Chun, you're adjusting your pace to maintain team cohesion without sacrificing accuracy. Rodriguez, your target identification is improving significantly." He glanced briefly toward the observation platform before adding, "Next sequence introduces multiple target arrays with hostage simulations. Discrimination and communication will be critical. Questions?" "No, Drill Sergeant," they replied in unison. As Blackwell moved to check on other teams, Rodriguez leaned slightly toward Madison. "The observers are watching you," he said quietly. "The woman with the scar hasn't taken her eyes off our team since we started." Madison nodded once but offered no further comment. Her focus remained on the upcoming sequence, mentally preparing for the additional variables it would introduce. External attention, regardless of its source or purpose, was irrelevant to the task at hand. The hostage simulation proved challenging for most teams. Targets appeared in configurations that required split-second discrimination between threats and non-combatants, with penalties for engaging the wrong silhouettes. The pressure created hesitation in some shooters and recklessness in others, both potentially fatal errors in real-world scenarios. Madison and Rodriguez navigated the challenge with remarkable effectiveness. Their communication was minimal but precise, using the shorthand they had developed during practice sessions. Madison took the longer, more complex shots while Rodriguez handled close targets and provided coverage during movements. Their rhythm was seamless, their coordination appearing instinctive rather than rehearsed. When the final results were tallied, their team had achieved the highest score of the day, not just in accuracy, but in decision speed and target discrimination. The accomplishment was noteworthy, but not surprising to those who had been watching. Madison's progression since her record-setting qualification. As the platoon prepared to move to their next training location, Captain Rivera approached with one of the observers, the woman with the weathered complexion and evaluative gaze. "Private Chen, a moment," Rivera called, her tone making it clear. This wasn't optional. Madison approached and came to attention, her posture perfect without appearing stiff or rehearsed. "At ease," Rivera said. "This is Major Collins. She'd like to speak with you briefly." Major Collins studied Madison with the kind of focused attention that seemed to catalog every detail for future reference. When she spoke, her voice was lower than expected, with the measured cadence of someone who chose words carefully. "I've been reviewing your performance metrics since your arrival at Basic, Private Chen," she began without preamble. "Your marksmanship scores are exceptional, but what interests me more is your adaptability and decision-making under pressure." Madison remained silent, recognizing that no response was required or expected. The Army has specialized units that operate in environments where those qualities are particularly valuable. Collins continued. Units where technical proficiency is necessary, but insufficient without the mental discipline to apply it effectively in complex, rapidly changing situations. She glanced briefly at Captain Rivera, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Following your graduation from basic training, you'll receive orders for advanced individual training. I've recommended that those orders include an assessment for potential inclusion in specialized marksmanship programs. This isn't an obligation, merely an opportunity. Should you choose to pursue it, the assessment will evaluate not just your shooting abilities, but your capacity to operate effectively under conditions of significant stress and ambiguity." Madison processed this information with her characteristic calm. "Thank you for the opportunity, ma'am. May I ask what these specialized programs entail?" A hint of approval flickered across Collins' face. The question revealed thoughtful consideration rather than automatic acceptance or rejection. "The specifics are classified until you complete initial assessment," she replied. "What I can tell you is that these pathways involve intensive training in advanced marksmanship, fieldcraft, and operational techniques that go well beyond standard infantry qualifications. They prepare soldiers for roles that require exceptional precision, judgment, and independence." She paused, seeming to make a decision about how much to reveal. Roles where the right shot at the right moment can change the course of critical operations. The implication was clear enough without explicit detail. Collins was describing sniper training or something similarly specialized roles, where marksmanship wasn't just a basic soldier skill, but the foundation of an operational specialty. "I understand, ma'am," Madison said. "I appreciate the consideration, and will give it serious thought." Collins nodded, apparently satisfied with this response. "Your cadre has my contact information if you have questions before receiving your orders. Good luck with the remainder of your training, Private." As Collins and Rivera walked away, Madison remained momentarily still, processing the implications of this unexpected development. The path she had envisioned when enlisting was expanding into territories she hadn't considered specialized, roles that would utilize her skills in ways that went beyond conventional service. Her grandfather had always emphasized that true mastery served a purpose beyond personal accomplishment. "Skill without application is just hobby," he would say during their long training sessions. "Find where your abilities can make a difference that matters." Perhaps this was what he had meant, not just military service in general, but finding the specific role where her particular capabilities could have the greatest impact. The thought both excited and sobered her, the potential responsibility, as weighty as the opportunity. When Madison rejoined her team, Rodriguez looked at her with undisguised curiosity. What was that about? Possible advanced training after basic, she replied simply, characteristically economical with details. Special forces? He pressed, his tone revealing both awe and a hint of envy. Madison shook her head. Specialized marksmanship program. Nothing confirmed, just an assessment opportunity. Rodriguez studied her expression, trying to gauge her reaction to what most would consider an exceptional recognition. You don't seem excited. Madison considered this observation. It's an opportunity, she said after a moment, but also a responsibility. I need to be sure it's the right path before committing to it. Some people would kill for that kind of recognition, Rodriguez noted, not critically but with genuine curiosity about her perspective. Madison adjusted her gear as they prepared to move out, her movements as precise and economical as her shooting had been. My grandfather used to say that recognition without purpose is just noise. What matters isn't being noticed. It's being effective. As they rejoined the platoon formation, Madison felt the weight of her grandfather's medal in her pocket. The small bronze disc had been her touchstone throughout basic training, a physical reminder of the standards he had set and the values he had lived by. Now it seemed to carry additional significance, a connection to decisions about how his legacy would continue to shape her future, not just in basic training, but in the specialized pathways that were opening before her. The platoon moved out toward their next training evolution, and Madison Chen continued her journey, a journey that had begun on a small range in northern Minnesota and was now expanding into possibilities she had never imagined, guided by principles that remained as constant as her grandfather's voice in her memory. 3 months after Madison's record-setting performance at Fort Benning, the Specialized Marksmanship Assessment Course at Fort Bliss, Texas presented challenges that made basic training qualification seem like a casual day at a civilian range. The desert facility, isolated from main post activities and shrouded in operational security, hosted only those who had demonstrated exceptional potential. The morning sun crept over the Oregon mountains, painting the desert landscape in hues of amber and gold. Heat shimmered across the training grounds, creating that distinctive distortion that complicated range estimation and wind reading. Exactly the conditions the assessment was designed to include. 12 candidates had begun the specialized program. 2 weeks earlier, only 8 remained. The washout rate was by design. This wasn't a course that could be passed through determination alone. Without allowing it to impact performance, all skills she had developed through years of training in varying conditions. The first target scenario appeared 4 hours into the deployment, a complex tableau involving multiple figures moving through the valley below. Some carried weapons, others didn't. Some displayed behavior that matched the engagement criteria in her mission packet. Others existed in the gray area that required judgment rather than simply following procedures. Madison observed without immediately acting, gathering information, assessing patterns, applying the analytical framework her grandfather had instilled. Take time to see what's really happening, not just what you first notice, he would tell her during training scenarios. The obvious is often misleading. When she finally took her first shot, it was with the same deliberate precision that had characterized her performance since the beginning of the assessment. One target, meeting specific criteria, engaged with a single round that found its mark with unerring accuracy. No follow-up was necessary. No position was compromised. As the day progressed into evening, the scenarios increased in complexity and ambiguity. Targets appeared in configurations that deliberately challenged the parameters in the mission packet, requiring interpretation rather than simple application of rules. Environmental conditions shifted as the desert cooled, changing visibility, affecting wind patterns, introducing new variables that required continuous adaptation. Throughout it all, Madison maintained her disciplined approach, observing thoroughly before acting, making decisions based on complete information rather than partial impressions, executing with precision when engagement was warranted, and maintaining disciplined restraint when it wasn't. Night brought new challenges as darkness transformed the landscape. Thermal and night vision equipment provided technological assistance, but introduced their own limitations and distortions. Target identification became more complex, distances harder to judge accurately, environmental conditions more difficult to read and compensate for. Madison adapted to these changing conditions with the same methodical focus she had demonstrated. Throughout the assessment, the night hours passed in a rhythm of vigilant observation, punctuated by carefully considered actions, each decision building on the analytical framework her grandfather had helped her develop through years of training. "The night doesn't change the fundamentals," he had told her during their first overnight training session when she was 14. "It just tests whether you truly understand them or have just been following procedures." By dawn of the second day, fatigue had become a significant factor. 30 hours of sustained vigilance, temperature extremes, and the constant mental pressure of evaluation had taken their toll on even the most resilient candidates. This was intentional. The assessment was designed to identify how performance degraded under extended stress and whether candidates could maintain effective decision-making despite these challenges. Madison felt the effects but managed them through the mental discipline her grandfather had emphasized as the foundation of everything else. "Physical discomfort is inevitable," he would say during long training sessions. "Mental clarity despite that discomfort is what separates the exceptional from the merely adequate." As the sun climbed higher on the second day, bringing renewed heat and the particular challenges of midday desert visibility, Madison continued her methodical approach. Target scenarios now included deliberate complication situations designed to test ethical judgment as well as technical capability, scenarios where the right decision might conflict with immediate tactical advantage. Through it all, she maintained the focused clarity that had become her defining characteristic. Not immune to fatigue or stress, but capable of performing effectively despite them, making decisions based on principles rather than expediency, executing with precision when action was warranted and showing disciplined restraint when it wasn't. When the final extraction call came 36 hours after insertion, Madison secured her position with the same methodical attention she had applied to establishing it. No trace left behind, no evidence of her presence remaining in the landscape. The helicopter appeared precisely on schedule, and she boarded with the controlled movements of someone managing fatigue without surrendering to it. Back at the assessment facility, the candidates assembled for preliminary debrief. The effects of the extended deployment were evident in their postures, their faces, the subtle signs of physical and mental fatigue that even the most disciplined couldn't completely conceal. Some showed the 1,000-yard stare of those who had pushed beyond normal endurance. Others displayed the controlled focus of those accustomed to operating despite discomfort. Major Collins addressed them with the direct approach that had characterized the entire assessment. "You've completed the final integrated evaluation. Full performance assessment will require detailed analysis of your target engagements, position, discipline, and decision-making throughout the deployment. That analysis will be completed within 48 hours. She paused, studying each candidate with the evaluative gaze that had become familiar over the weeks of assessment. "For now, focus on recovery, rehydrate, refuel, rest. Medical staff will conduct post-operation health assessments. Barring any concerns requiring immediate attention, you are released to quarters until 0800 tomorrow." As the group dispersed, Command Sergeant Major Ellis approached Madison. His expression revealed nothing of his assessment, but his posture suggested a different quality of attention than earlier interactions. "How did it go out there, Chen?" he asked, his tone conversational rather than evaluative for the first time since the assessment began. Madison considered the question seriously. "Challenging but manageable, Sergeant Major. The scenario complexity increased significantly during the night phase. Target discrimination became the primary challenge rather than engagement execution." Ellis nodded, seeming to find confirmation of something in her response. "That's exactly the point of the exercise. Technical proficiency is the baseline requirement, but operational effectiveness depends on judgment under ambiguous conditions, knowing when to act and when to hold position, discerning which targets warrant engagement and which don't. These decisions define effectiveness in the roles you're being assessed for." He studied her for a moment longer. "Get some rest. We'll talk more after the final evaluations are complete." As Madison made her way to the temporary quarters assigned to assessment candidates, she found herself reflecting on the path that had led her to this moment. From the small range in northern Minnesota, where her grandfather had first placed a rifle in her hands, to Fort Benning, where her capabilities had been recognized, to this specialized assessment that could define her military career. The journey hadn't been one she had consciously planned or pursued. Rather, it had unfolded through a series of moments where preparation met opportunity, where the skills and mindset her grandfather had instilled created possibilities she hadn't anticipated. She thought about the bronze medal still in her possession, the tangible connection to the man who had shaped her understanding of excellence. What would he think of this path she was following? Of the specialized role she might assume if the assessment confirmed her suitability? She could almost hear his response. "The skill itself isn't what matters. It's how you apply it. Whether on a competition range or in operational settings, the principle remains the same: excellence in service of something greater than yourself." 48 hours later, the remaining candidates assembled in the briefing room for final assessments. The atmosphere was charged with the particular tension that comes from knowing significant outcomes hang in the balance. Careers would be shaped by the evaluations about to be delivered. Pathways opened or closed based on performance during the extended assessment. Major Collins entered with Command Sergeant Major Ellis and several other evaluators, their expressions professionally neutral as they took positions at the front of the room. Collins didn't waste time on preliminaries. "The integrated assessment has been completed. Your performance has been evaluated across multiple dimensions: technical proficiency, decision-making, concealment discipline, environmental adaptation, and psychological resilience. These factors, combined with your previous evaluations, have determined your suitability for specialized marksmanship roles." She consulted a tablet, then looked up at the candidates. "When I call your name, you will report to the adjacent room for individual assessment review and assignment notification. Adams." The first candidate rose and moved to the door, his expression revealing the nervous anticipation they all felt despite efforts to maintain professional composure. As the names continued to be called, Madison maintained her characteristic calm, not detached or unaffected by the significance of the moment, but centered in the quiet confidence that came from knowing she had performed to the best of her abilities. Whatever the outcome, she had approached the assessment with the same disciplined focus her grandfather had instilled through years of patient instruction. "Chun." Madison rose and moved toward the indicated door with measured steps. Inside, she found it required a rare combination of physical capability, technical proficiency, and psychological resilience that couldn't be taught, only identified and refined. Madison stood at the edge of the assembly area, her posture relaxed but alert, watching the instructors prepare the day's evolution with the focused attention that had become her trademark. The weeks of assessment had been grueling by any standard: sleep deprivation, environmental extremes, psychological pressure designed to identify breaking points before they could emerge in operational settings. Throughout it all, Madison had maintained the same quiet focus that had distinguished her during basic training. not impervious to the challenges, but seemingly able to compartmentalize them, to separate discomfort from function in ways that the instructors had noted in their evaluations. Chen, Madison turned to find Command Sergeant Major Ellis approaching. A 27-year veteran with multiple combat deployments and a reputation for absolute candor, Ellis was the senior enlisted advisor for the specialized program. His assessment carried weight that could determine the trajectory of a candidate's entire military career. "Sergeant Major," Madison acknowledged, coming to attention. "At ease," Ellis replied, studying her with the evaluative gaze that had made candidates uncomfortable since the program's first day. "How are you holding up?" The question wasn't casual conversation, it was an assessment. Ellis wanted to know if Madison was self-aware enough to accurately gauge her own condition after 2 weeks of intense pressure. "Good, Sergeant Major," she replied without hesitation. "Sleep deficit is manageable. Hydration and nutrition on target. Mental focus solid." Ellis nodded, appreciating the precise self-evaluation. No false bravado, no unnecessary elaboration, just an accurate status. "Report. Today's evolution will test everything you've learned so far," he said, his tone making it clear this was significant. Not just technical skills, but judgment, adaptability, and performance under extreme pressure. Some excellent candidates have reached this point only to discover they lack a critical quality that can't be measured until they're pushed to absolute limits. Madison absorbed this information without visible reaction, though internally she was already preparing mentally for whatever challenges lay ahead. "I understand you were coached by your grandfather from an early age," Ellis continued, shifting to a topic that seemed unrelated to the immediate assessment. "Yes, Sergeant Major, from age 6 until his passing 2 years ago." Ellis nodded thoughtfully. Harold Chen had a reputation in certain circles, not just as a marksman, but as someone who understood the psychology of high-pressure performance, the mental discipline that separates those who can execute under fire from those who can't. Madison hadn't expected this level of knowledge about her family background. "You knew of my grandfather?" "By reputation," Ellis clarified. "I competed against some of his students in inter-service matches years ago. They all shared certain characteristics, exceptional technical skills, obviously, but more importantly, a distinctive mental approach. A calmness under pressure that can't be taught through standard methods." He studied her for a moment longer. "I see the same qualities in you. But today will determine whether those qualities extend beyond competition settings into the operational domain." With that cryptic statement, Ellis turned toward the waiting instructors. "Gear up and be at the staging area in 15 minutes. Today's assessment will run until completion, regardless of weather or other conditions." As he walked away, Madison felt a familiar sense of focused anticipation. Not anxiety, not excitement, but the heightened awareness that came from recognizing a significant challenge and preparing to meet it with everything she had developed over years of disciplined practice. She gathered her equipment with methodical precision, checking each component, securing everything in its optimal position, conducting the pre-operation rituals her grandfather had instilled as fundamental to performance preparation. Physical readiness created the foundation, but mental preparation made the difference when margins for error disappeared. At the staging area, the remaining candidates assembled in silent anticipation. The atmosphere was charged with the particular tension that came from knowing this was a pivotal moment, a test that would separate those who would continue toward specialized roles from those who would return to conventional units. Major Collins, whom Madison had first met at Fort Benning, stood before them with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to operating in environments where hesitation meant failure. Her weathered features revealed nothing of what lay ahead, but her eyes assessed each candidate with the evaluative scrutiny of someone looking for specific qualities that couldn't be faked. "Today's evolution is a full integration assessment," she began without preamble. You will deploy to field positions via helicopter insertion, establish concealment in assigned sectors, and engage targets of opportunity based on criteria provided in your mission packets. The exercise runs continuously for 36 hours, through nightfall and the following day. She paused, allowing the implications to register. 36 hours meant contending with fatigue, temperature extremes between desert day and night, and the cumulative mental pressure of sustained vigilance. This is not a qualification course, Collins continued. It's an assessment of your capacity to operate effectively in conditions approximating actual deployment scenarios. Your performance will be evaluated not just on accuracy, but on target. Discrimination, concealment discipline, environmental adaptation, and decision-making under ambiguous conditions. The candidates absorbed this information with varying expressions, some displaying nervous anticipation, others adopting the blank professional mask that military training encouraged. Madison's face revealed nothing beyond focused attention, her breathing maintaining the same measured rhythm that characterized her shooting. Additionally, Collins added, her tone shifting slightly, you will be operating without direct supervision for the duration of the exercise. Observers will monitor your sectors, but no guidance or feedback will be provided until the exercise concludes. You are expected to make operational decisions independently based on the parameters in your mission packets. This was the real test, Madison realized. Not just marksmanship under difficult conditions. They had all demonstrated that capability already, but the judgment to operate effectively when no one was providing immediate direction or validation. Collins gestured toward a table where sealed packets awaited. Collect your mission parameters and proceed to the helicopter landing zone. You have 10 minutes for final preparations before insertion. Madison collected her packet and moved to a quiet corner to review its contents. The mission parameters were intentionally ambiguous. She would be positioned in a sector containing multiple potential targets, not all of which should be engaged. The criteria for engagement required careful discernment, not just technical capability. As she studied the parameters, Madison recognized the true nature of the assessment. This wasn't about hitting targets under difficult conditions. It was about making correct decisions about which targets to engage, when to engage them, and how to maintain operational security throughout extended deployment. It was testing judgment as much as marksmanship. The helicopter insertions began precisely on schedule. Each candidate deployed to isolated positions across a training area designed to simulate varied terrain features. Madison's assigned sector was a rocky outcropping overlooking a valley, where target scenarios would unfold over the coming day and night. As the helicopter departed, leaving her alone with her equipment and the vast desert expanse, Madison felt a strange sense of homecoming. Not to the desert itself, which was nothing like the Minnesota forest where she had learned to shoot, but to the fundamental situation, alone with her rifle, responsible for her decisions, accountable for every action and inaction. Her grandfather had created similar scenarios during her advanced training, though on a smaller scale. He would position her in the woods before dawn, with specific instructions about which targets to engage and which to bypass, then leave her to make those determinations independently. The shot you don't take is often more important than the one you do, he would remind her during debriefs. Anyone can pull a trigger. Knowing when not to, that's the real skill. Madison established her position with methodical efficiency, setting up her observation post with the careful attention to concealment that the instructors had emphasized throughout the assessment course. Natural materials supplemented her camouflage, breaking up her outline and integrating her presence into the landscape until she became nearly invisible even to trained observation. Once her position was secure, she settled into the disciplined patience that distinguished exceptional snipers from merely competent marksmen. This wasn't about quick reactions or rapid engagement. It was about sustained vigilance, about maintaining focus and decision capability through hours of apparent inactivity, punctuated by moments when everything depended on perfect execution. The desert heat intensified as the sun climbed higher. But Madison had prepared for this environmental challenge. Careful hydration, strategic use of cooling techniques, and the mental discipline to acknowledge discomfort. Command Sergeant Major Ellis waiting, his expression unreadable as he gestured toward a chair across from his position. "Have a seat," he said, his tone neither encouraging nor discouraging, simply professional. Madison complied, her posture straight but not rigid, her hands resting comfortably in her lap. The practiced stillness that characterized her shooting was evident even in this moment of potential career significance. Ellis studied her for a moment before speaking. "Your performance during the integrated assessment was exceptional, particularly in the areas of target discrimination and decision-making under ambiguous conditions. You maintained position discipline throughout the deployment, adapted effectively to changing environmental conditions, and demonstrated consistent judgment despite fatigue and pressure." He paused, his expression shifting slightly. "More importantly, you showed the quality that distinguishes truly effective operators in specialized roles, the ability to balance technical execution with ethical discernment. Several scenarios were deliberately designed to test your judgment in situations where the technically correct shot might not be the operationally appropriate decision. Your responses in those scenarios were noteworthy." Madison absorbed this assessment without visible reaction, though internally she felt a sense of validation. Her grandfather had emphasized this principle repeatedly during her training. Technical capability served judgment, not the other way around, based on your overall performance. Ellis continued, "You've been selected for specialized training in the Advanced Marksmanship Program. This pathway leads to roles supporting sensitive operations where precision, judgment, and independent decision-making are critical requirements. It's not a path many are offered, and fewer complete successfully." He leaned forward slightly. "Before you respond, understand what this means. The training is among the most demanding in the military. The operational responsibilities that follow are equally challenging. You will be expected to make life or death decisions independently, often with limited information and under extreme pressure. The psychological burden is significant." Madison considered his words carefully. "I understand, Sergeant Major. My grandfather prepared me to respect both the capability and the responsibility that comes with it." Ellis nodded, seeming to find confirmation of something in her response. "Your grandfather appears to have prepared you well for a path he couldn't have specifically anticipated. That speaks to the quality of his instruction, not just in technical skills, but in the principles that guide their application." He handed her a folder containing assignment details. "Report to Fort Carson in 3 weeks. The specialized training cadre will contact you with specific preparation instructions. Until then, you're on transitional leave. Questions?" "No, Sergeant Major," Madison replied, accepting the folder with the same composed focus she brought to every task. Ellis rose, indicating the meeting was concluded, but paused before Madison reached the door. "Chun," he said, his tone shifting slightly, "your grandfather would be proud, not just of your shooting, though that's exceptional by any standard, but of the judgment you've demonstrated in applying those skills. That's the real legacy he left you." Madison felt something shift in her chest at these words, not just pride or validation, but a sense of connection across time and distance. Her grandfather had prepared her for this moment, not by specifically envisioning it, but by instilling principles that transcended particular applications. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," she said simply, the words carrying more weight than their brevity might suggest. As she left the assessment facility, stepping into the clear desert afternoon, Madison felt a sense of purpose more defined than when she had first arrived at basic training. The path ahead would be challenging in ways she couldn't fully anticipate, But the foundation that would carry her through those challenges had been laid years ago on a small range in northern Minnesota. She touched the bronze medal in her pocket, the tangible connection to the man who had shaped her understanding of excellence. Not just technical excellence, but the kind that integrated skill with judgment, capability with responsibility, personal achievement with service to something greater. The desert stretched before her, vast and demanding, much like the path she had chosen to follow. But within that vastness was clarity, the clarity that came from knowing that excellence wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about being precisely who you needed to be when it mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from